Hello, welcome to another edition of Hinds Sight. Well, these are trying times for the world, and I say that because the United States of America is very much the hub of the world as the superpower, the preeminent superpower. Whatever happens in the United States affect people all over the world. And of course, I'm talking about the recent developments surrounding the cases of the grand juries in Ferguson and the one in Staten Island, New York. Both grand juries, of course, returning a decision not to indict police officers who were accused of killing unarmed African young men. Now, here's the story. Race in America is a constant. It has always been a constant. Every now and again, we delude ourselves, as Bob Marley would say, that some or the other we've come to the end of race. And our excursion, our most recent excursion, was the election of Barack Obama. And we talk about post-race and the end of race and all of that kind of stuff. But I think the decisions by the grand jury here, these grand juries, are a firm reminder of the stubbornness of race. And I want to say that race has to be stubborn because one has to understand that race is so interwoven into the social and political, economic and legal DNA of the United States of America. To declare that it has come to an end is really a fallacy. And because it is so interwoven into the institutions. What we have today is race as a very unconscious and not clearly overt kind of phenomenon. And so what happens is that when we have overt actions, like what happened to Michael Brown in Ferguson or Eric Garner in Staten Island, those were overt racial action. Now, if those incidents had occurred during the period of segregation, we would not be having the conversation that we're having because everyone knew what segregation meant. Black people were separated, not just by us saying that was by law and separate and unequal. And so there would be no quarrel, no discussion about whether it's racism or not racism. What has happened since the end of legal segregation? That the burden of proof is on those who are facing racism. And so therefore we have this debate that is going on. What is very significant here is that whereas they were able to spin what happened in Ferguson, you couldn't spin what happened in Staten Island the same way because the video was there for all to see. And so therefore, I think we are in this moment in America and by extension the world where we once again have to become racially literate. We have to become more racially we have to become more racially aware of what is going on so we're able to make sense of what we see before us. Race operates in a way that sometimes it's not easy to really to really put your finger on it. So I think this is a moment for America to come to its senses once again and to get off that notion of post-race and to realize that when institutions, when the very fabric of the country is wrapped up in this phenomenon, remember race is grounded in the notions of inferiority and superiority. It is grounded in the notion of privilege and lack of privilege. And so therefore, as we talk about getting rid of race, we have to talk about getting rid of what? Privilege and underprivilege. We have to talk about getting rid of inferiority and superiority because that's the basis of race. It's about one group or some groups having more institutional privileges in society and wanting to hold on to those privileges. And of course, once you have privilege, there's going to be underprivilege. Once you have superiority, there's going to be inferiority. The problem for African Americans, black people, is that race is not the same race of 50, 60 years ago. Of course, the world has moved on. The world has changed. It manifests itself differently. And we have a whole new group whole new class of African Americans who are, in a sense, getting more benefit from the system than their parents and grandparents. And so, therefore, the question for them is, how do I remain critical and vigilant about a system to which I am getting some benefits from? How do I benefit from something while critiquing that thing? And so as we look at what's happening with these grand juries, and as we await the verdict from the young 12-year-old boy who was shot in Ohio, it is a moment that we have to look and begin this new conversation on race and racism. Now, what does that have to do for us in the Caribbean? What does it have to do with us in the Caribbean? What does it have to do with us in Guyana? In Guyana and Trinidad, given the ethno-racial situation in those countries, we do have the same phenomenon there and in the rest of the Caribbean of young black men being murdered by the police. The lesson here is that black lives, especially young black male lives, do not have the same kind of value as other lives. And so, whether it's in a predominantly white society like America, or predominantly black society like Jamaica and Antigua and so on and so forth, or a black and brown society like Trinidad and Guyana, the phenomenon of racism is really interwoven into the social system. So, as some of us have argued, in Guyana, we have had this spate of killings of young black men. Over 600 young black men have been summarily slaughtered since 1992 by the state. And the state, of course, is governed by the East Indian elite. But even when the state is governed by an African elite, we find the same kind of murdering of black lives. So we, in the Guyana and the Caribbean, have our own Fergusons. We have our own Staten Island. But we also grapple with the issue, is it race or is it class, or whatever we want to label it. But what's happening in America, what's happening in Ferguson, Staten Island, they have resonance for us in Guyana and the Caribbean, because we are dealing with the same phenomenon there. Yes, race manifests itself differently in Guyana. It manifests itself differently in the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean. But race and racism are very much there as part of the lived realities of people, in particular poor people of color, and poor people of the darkest color, which is we're talking about black people and young black men. One only have to listen. The General Secretary and Minister of Home Affairs, who is tasked with law and order in Guyana, referred to the young man Shaquille Grant, who was gunned down by the police a couple of years ago, referred to him as a criminal in Guyana. In Guyana, as a criminal, the PPP had to apologize to Shaquille Grant's mother that the General Secretary made a mistake. But the fact that the Minister of Home Affairs could willy-nilly refer to a young black man who was gunned down by the police as a criminal, it speaks to a particular kind of mindset. It speaks to a particular kind of way of seeing it. Every young black man, most young black men, in the eyes of the larger society, especially those who are responsible for law and order, black young men all over the world are seen as criminals. And so it wasn't a slip of the tongue on the part of the minister. It was part of a mindset. And when we look at the PPP, talking about if the opposition were to get into government, blood will run in the Demerara River. Even the Stabrook News, which is very conservative on the question of race, had to admit that is race baiting. We've seen those editorials coming out in the government newspaper referring to young black men as criminals and socialized to be criminals and so forth. And so therefore, we're at a moment in the world where we've got to realize that race and racism are not gone. They're very much part of our everyday existence. But we always are feeling whenever these things happen, like in Ferguson or Staten Island, we are feeling for race, and we should stop feeling for race, feeling as in looking for it. We should be able to recognize race and racism when it hits us. And in order for us to do that, it means that we have got to educate ourselves as to how race is practiced, how race and racism function in contemporary society. And so let it be told that it's not just in America, but it's in Guyana, it's in Trinidad, it's in Jamaica, that the phenomenon of Ferguson and Staten Island are there for us. And we should be able to draw lessons from what's happening here in the United States of America. Until the next time, David Hinds thanking you for tuning into yet another edition of Hinds Sight, where we discuss issues that affect Guyana and the Caribbean, of course, as in this episode, the Black World. You can catch my other videos on Hinds Sight, my YouTube channel. I sound cool, right? My YouTube channel. And of course, my website, which is not so cool because that's old stuff. Guyana-Caribbean Politics.com. See you next time.